Elden Ring, a game that on the surface is much more approachable and relatable to the masses, in a way that other From Software titles have simply not been capable of achieving. Now, why is this? Unquestionably, there is a myriad of gameplay choices that From Software had to make for Elden Ring to so quickly become the company's most accessible and commercially successful title. However, I don't believe the gameplay evolution of From Software's games is enough to warrant such an explosive and visceral reaction to the game, nor do I feel as though it explains the clear interest people have taken in the world and story of Elden Ring and the lands between. In the past, From Software games such as Dark Souls were incredibly esoteric, and particularly appealed to those who had an interest or knowledge of the Japanese manga Berserk, as well as some Western references, such as Gwyn being an analog for Zeus, as he is a lightning-wielding leader of the gods. Though, interestingly, the mythological and fictional sources of inspiration in the Dark Souls series were arguably too broad, as the primary inspiration was the aforementioned Berserk. However, From Software also drew from Greek, Roman, and Anglo-Saxon sources, which in my eyes diluted the focus of the story, or it could have at least influenced others to experience a similar thought. If you want to see the similarities and the direct impact Berserk has had on the creation of Dark Souls, I recommend checking out 61 references of Berserk in Dark Souls, including Elden Ring, by Zvoke. He does include some inspiration from Berserk to Elden Ring, though the video is primarily focused on Dark Souls, as it's more directly connected to Berserk. I by no means think the Dark Souls games have weak stories, though they do feel a bit more referential to source material, as opposed to integrating the source material with their own created world. And I think this is one of the primary differences from other From Software titles and why Elden Ring has amassed such incredible financial and critical success, as the game does have clear inspirations, though they fit together incredibly well and largely all relate to the same mythological concepts that cultures have been using for thousands of years. I am specifically talking about the Erdtree and the lands between, which can be viewed as analogs for the symbolic Tree of Life, as well as a land that could perhaps represent a form of otherworldly afterlife or purgatory, though that part is likely the most unclear and mysterious subject of the game. What exactly are the lands between? Moreover, an inspiration I would like to mention briefly that most are aware of when it comes to Elden Ring is that it has some clear inspiration from J.R.R. Tolkien's Lord of the Rings, as the plot does center around different factions of a kingdom vying for rings of power. I find this to be incredibly fitting with the themes, setting, and narrative of Elden Ring, as Lord of the Rings was heavily inspired from a variety of sources. Though one of the primary works he referenced was Beowulf, an Old English story about a Scandinavian warrior who accomplished many feats, one of which being slaying a dragon. Getting all Jordan Peterson up in here. Elden Ring has some clear Norse and Scandinavian influences, both in terms of story and setting, which seem to go along well with their homage to the Lord of the Rings, as are both heavily influenced by Northern European sources. With the inclusion of George R.R. Martin in the development of the lore and world of Elden Ring, it's clear that it has even more European fantasy thrown in alongside From Software's usual Berserk inspiration, and a dash of Lord of the Rings, which isn't all that surprising considering George's past works, as well as From Software's interest in a more European fantasy setting. While I have laid down the groundwork for explaining the major sources of inspiration, I want to explore the most obvious and obscure potential sources of inspiration that both Miyazaki and Martin were influenced by during the creation of Elden Ring. Specifically, I will be examining the Erdtree in the setting of the game, the lands between, as these aspects of Elden Ring have both obvious as well as more obscure sources of influence, all of which relate to mythologies and religions around the globe. This video will by no means be providing an exhaustive analysis of influences for the Erdtree as well as the lands between. However, I believe I have curated most of the religious and mythological concepts and tales that relate to Elden Ring. I also apologize for all the terrible pronunciation you're about to hear, though, with that out of the way, let's get started. The most obvious mythological connection that people have made, and are already and continuing to talk about, is the massive world tree, Yggdrasil, from Norse mythology, which connects and holds the cosmos together. Yggdrasil connects the heavens to the underworlds, with humanity existing in between the roots and branches. So you could almost say that Norse mythology placed humans in what could be considered the lands between, specifically the lands between heaven and hell. There isn't a clearly defined heaven or underworld in Elden Ring, however the deep-root depths of the Erdtree appear quite symbolic of underworld settings, particularly as it's filled to the brim with monstrously large creatures, and the frog-like creatures that spew pure death breath. Moreover, in the deep-root depths, a powerful dragon can be fought, and this could be a reference to the dragon Nidhogg, the dragon in Norse mythology that gnaws at the roots of the world tree. Clearly, the dragon fought at the roots of the Erdtree is a blight on the tree, and may be inspired by Nidhogg, And though not a perfect comparison, Nidhogg is typically described as being black and deep red, much like the dragon Fortisax fought at the base of the Erdtree. Moreover, the branches of the Erdtree can be seen as being symbolic of the power and grace of the Greater Will overseeing the lands between, representing the higher status of the Greater Will in comparison to humanity, much like the gods in Asgard who rest atop Yggdrasil. Furthermore, the Norse gods living atop Yggdrasil were quite fond of humanity, shared their power and wisdom with humanity, and chose to protect them against the beasts of the 9 underworlds, upon which the Asgardians' grace did not shine, though it did shine upon Midgard, the land between the gods and demonic entities. The aesthetic choices for the Erdtree are also very similar to depictions of Yggdrasil, as anyone with eyes can see when comparing the two. Yggdrasil is often shown as having a golden color, or at the very least is often depicted emanating golden light from its branches, which again is reminiscent of the Erdtree. The tree also grants immense power and wisdom to those willing to make a sacrifice to it, which could perhaps be loosely linked to the sacrifice needed to burn away the thorns and enter the Erdtree that is carried out in-game by Melina. In Norse mythology, Odin sacrifices himself to Yggdrasil to gain immense wisdom and knowledge of the universe, which subsequently leads to an immense increase in his power and authority over his subjects, which can be related to Melina, though realistically it's more similar to Marika, who perhaps had to make a similar sacrifice to gain her godlike status, as she did have to become the vessel for the power she sought, irrevocably altering her very being. And to this day, we still do not know entirely what makes someone an Empyrean, and perhaps there was some sort of sacrifice that Marika had to make. Perhaps most pertinent, Odin gained the ability to read runes from making the sacrifice to Yggdrasil, much like Marika gaining the power of the runes within the Elden Ring when becoming an earthly avatar for the Greater Will. The runes that Odin discovered were used to alter the laws of the cosmos and reality itself, much like the abilities given to the Elden Ring, which dictates the physical laws of the lands between. However, unlike Yggdrasil, the Erdtree can only dictate the laws of reality within the lands between, whereas the runes written into Yggdrasil by Odin would carry changes throughout all of the realms connected to the tree. Regardless of this difference, runes in both Elden Ring and Norse mythology are used to manipulate and change reality as those in possession of the runes see fit, which tracks well with the various endings of Elden Ring, as different runes can be used to have different effects on the lands between as they influence the Elden Ring and Erdtree to alter how the laws of reality function in the lands. Furthermore, Yggdrasil, like the Erdtree, essentially acts as a recycling plant for the souls of the dead. In Elden Ring, the shattering of the Elden Ring has led to the Erdtree rejecting souls and breaking the cycle of life and death it brought with it. Yggdrasil was also governed by a greater will and lived in a cycle, as the cosmos in Norse mythology is cyclical, in a constant cycle of destruction and reconstruction, with Ragnarok always bringing an end to the universe, yet always restarting it as well. In a sense, the shattering of the Elden Ring and the war it brewed can be viewed as Ragnarok in the lands between, as the world is chaotic and falling apart, yet you can correct it and renew the cycle of the Erdtree. A fascinating connection I found in my research is to Tir na Nog. Tir na Nog is one of the various names for the Celtic otherworld, though it's somewhat unclear if Tir na Nog actually represents the entirety of the Celtic otherworld, or if it is simply a part of it. Nonetheless, the most prominent connections to the lands between are easily the existence of a tree of life at its center, as well as the land being surrounded by a thick, deep fog. In Tales of Tir na Nog, there are several ways described in which one could travel there, though one of the most prevalent is that one must journey through a sea of fog to reach the land, which is adorned with a massive tree. The ruler of Tir na Nog is a god considered to be the progenitor of humanity, and stands tall as a proud and powerful warrior, with a golden-haired wife at his side. Similar to the lands between, Tir na Nog is reached by passing a great fog, and was once ruled by a great warrior and his golden-haired wife, though in Elden Ring, it is the golden-haired wife, Marika, who is more akin to a god. Moreover, both the lands between and Tir na Nog are islands that seem to exist outside of the rest of reality. Another interesting connection to many of the tales of Tir na Nog is the presence of heroes traveling to the land via a magic white mare, the most prominent of which is mentioned in the tale of Oisin and is quite reminiscent of the trusty and noble steed of the Tarnished, Torrent. The tree in Tir na Nog also is said to house the souls of the dead, represented by singing birds in the tree. The branches of the trees also bear golden apples, which may not have a direct comparison to Elden Ring, though it is quite similar to many other tales of trees of life. The tree of life in Tir na Nog was called Cran Bathad by ancient Celtics, and like Yggdrasil, connected the lands of the underworld. Moreover, the Celts believed trees to be living mystical beings, and the humans actually came from trees, and would again be trees after death, which interestingly can be related to many of the corpses not only seen in Elden Ring, but in many of From Software games, as beings transforming into trees seem to be a popular motif in their works. The Celts viewed cutting down trees, particularly Cran Bathad, as a grave sin, much as burning the Erdtree in Elden Ring is seen as a cardinal sin, as the tree is similarly revered in both cultures. In broad terms, Christianity has several references to a tree of life, as well as to a tree of knowledge of good and evil, both of which can be found in various versions of the Bible, as well in some of the apocryphal texts that had way cooler takes on the biblical tales. The Tree of Life is mentioned less than the Tree of Knowledge of Good and Evil, though it is apparently also present in the Garden of Eden when Adam and Eve decide to break God's rule and are subsequently cast out from the garden. Right off the bat, the Garden of Eden can be seen as a parallel for the lands between, as there were arbitrary rules the inhabitants had to follow in order to receive blessings such as immortality from God. While it's clear in Elden Ring that the Erdtree does not necessarily provide eternal life, as this was the result of the Rune of Death being removed from the Elden Ring, the Erdtree does effectively grant immortality through its blessings, as well as its ability to recycle the soul of each inhabitant who dies, and then reincarnate them in a new body. Rather than being cast out of the lands between and becoming tarnished, Adam and Eve were cast out of the Garden of Eden, unable to receive God's blessings, and no longer had access to the sacred trees. A sect of Christians called the Gnostics, or Gnostics, I'm not entirely sure which is actually correct, believed in and made reference to a golden sun-colored tree north of paradise that could grant eternal life. Interestingly, some viewed the roots of the tree negatively though, believing it to be a source of evil, similar to the distorted and malformed state of the roots of the Erdtree can be seen in as a result of Godwin's corpse fusing with the tree. Trees are quite sacred in Islam, and the most revered of these sacred trees is known as the Tree of Immortality, which again relates to the immortality that can effectively be granted through the grace of the Erdtree. The Tree of Immortality in Islam is often meant to symbolize a code or way of life that people are meant to follow, much like the Golden Order of the Greater Will, represented by the Erdtree. Interestingly, the only tree in Eden in Islam is the Tree of Immortality, and the primary reason Adam and Eve were not meant to eat from the tree is because they likely would have become angels, which raises a parallel to the Erdtree, as it too is associated with great power and apparent immortality when certain conditions are met. Old Hebrew and Judaic mysticism involved a tree of life called Etz Chaim. Definitely did not get that right. Probably needed to, speak from the back of my throat a bit more, but hopefully people will let it pass. Anyway, Etz Chaim, and similar to Christianity, is distinct from the Tree of Knowledge of Good and Evil. The tree was closely associated with wisdom and immortality, as well as served as the influence for the Kabbalah, a symbolic representation of the Tree of Life that bears striking similarities to the Eastern concept of chakras. The Tree of Life, as well as the Kabbalah, represent connections between humans, angels, and God, and the Tree of Life could be used to gain enlightenment. While quite speculative, I do wonder how much angels and God can act as parallels for the demigods in Elden Ring and the Greater Will. The demigods are clearly nowhere near the power of the Greater Will, and were initially servants of the Greater Will, and even they do not understand the machinations or intentions of the Greater Will itself. Obviously, this theme can be found in Christianity as well. In Elden Ring, the grace of the Golden Order in the Erdtree appears to be arbitrarily given and taken away, similar to how God acts in the Book of Enoch, an apocryphal book used by some in the Hebrew mysticism. In the Book of Enoch, God grants eternal life to those whose names have been written in the Book of Life by allowing them to eat the fruit from the Tree of Life. Much like the Greater Will, God gives no direct or tangible reasoning as to why not all were given his blessing, yet the connection seems apparent. Hinduism has a world or cosmic tree, though this version has the tree growing upside down with the roots connecting to the heavens, and the branches and leaves reaching down to the earth. Interestingly, the fact that the tree is upside down means those living on Earth actually receive plenty of mystical blessings from the branches and leaves of the tree, much in the way the leaves of the Erdtree spread throughout the lands between and grant grace to the people. Known as Akshaya Vata, or Immortal Tree, the Hindu world tree is also strikingly similar to the Erdtree, as it is described as resplendent in gold, which evokes the imagery of the ever-golden Erdtree. Moreover, the Akshaya Vata represents the path to salvation in Hinduism, similar to how the Golden Order of the Elden Ring and Erdtree represent what the Greater Will believes to be the correct way of life. Similar to the plan of Krishna in Hinduism, who planted the tree to provide humans with a path to salvation in his eyes. one that will bring them closer to the gods and the heavens themselves. Buddhism also has references to a tree of life, specifically known as the Bodhi or Bodhi tree. I'm going to go with Bodhi on this one, even though I have not double-checked that. The Bodhi tree is also known as the Tree of Enlightenment, as it's believed that Mahatma Gandhi, the original Buddha, achieved spiritual enlightenment, or nirvana, by sitting underneath this tree. A loose connection can be seen between the wisdom granted by the Bodhi tree and the enlightenment that one can gain by having high levels of faith in Elden Ring, as this allows the player to use spells such as the Law of Regression, which will reveal the secrets of the world, which could be connected to wisdom and spiritual enlightenment. Moreover, those connected to the Erdtree seem to have prophetic abilities, as Marika and the prophets of the Golden Order demonstrate this, which may relate to the concept of spiritual enlightenment. Though with that said, the Bodhi tree seems to have more clear parallels to Odin's experience with Yggdrasil, more than anything directly from Elden Ring. So in this one, I do want to forewarn you that I really do not know how to say the name of this religion and people, as well as a lot of the names of their trees, so bear with me. The Sera religion originates from Senegal in West Africa, and like many of the aforementioned cultures and religions across the globe, trees were viewed as sacred entities. Specifically, the Nikal tree is considered to be the first tree to bloom in the primordial swamp of creation that spawned all of existence. There is some dispute among Sera scholars about the original sacred tree, as there is also great significance placed on other trees such as the Nikuf, Sas, and Baobab. However, the other trees were still considered sacred, with the Sas symbolizing overall health, and the Nikuf was a source of anti-venom from snake bites. The significance of a sacred tree in the Sera religion was largely determined by the Sera saints who were associated with them, with the more sacred and revered of the trees being represented by these saints, who were often depicted as snakes, interestingly enough. Much of the Sera religion and traditions have been passed down orally. Thus, there is little in the way of historical texts that discuss why the Nikal tree was so revered in particular, though what little is known would suggest that the tree was used to cure a myriad of ailments, and was used to help treat wounds and prevent infection. While not as clear-cut as some of the other connections, it would still seem this religion shares similarities with Elden Ring's Erdtree, if only for reverence being given to a sacred tree that provides life-prolonging benefits. Moreover, while the Sas tree is a bit of a contentious topic among some Sera scholars, the remaining documentation for the significance of the Sas tree in their mythology does seem to put it closer to the prototypical tree of life found in many other cultures, as the tree was said to prolong human life and provide various boons to its adherents. Similar to the blessing granted by being born at the foot of the Erdtree in Elden Ring, proponents of the Sas claimed that being born at the foot of the Sas tree would give the child a long, healthy, and lucky life. Furthermore, the Sas tree could supposedly heal those who touched its bark. What I find most fascinating about the Sas tree is its downfall, so to speak, as the Sas tree is said to have abused its supernatural powers and overstepped its bounds in the eyes of the Sera people, and as such, the tree fell in disgrace without the support of its followers. While this may be a bit of a stretch, the Sas tree eventually became to be known as the Nias tree by some, which variably translates to scar or clot, words that, when said together, sound eerily similar to the potent poison permeating the lands between in Elden Ring, the Scarlet Rot. When the Sas tree fell out of favor with the Sera people, they began to focus on the Somb, a very large tree in Sera country that is very resistant to rot, much like the Erdtree of Elden Ring, as the tree continues to shine golden despite the pervasive rot at its roots and across the lands between. The Orthodox Sera religion today has the Somb tree rivaling the Nikal for the status as the Tree of Life, as the Somb symbolizes immortality, and is said to be the seed that produced all plant life on Earth, much like the golden seeds of the Erdtree, which are used to enhance crimson tears, which develop your character further and push you ever closer to immortality through its mystical healing properties that can heal any injury or ailment. Finally, reincarnation is a bit different from the cycle in Elden Ring. Yet there is still a pertinent connection I wanted to mention. Reincarnation is a strongly held belief in the Sera religion, and it involves passing through several stages of reincarnation. In the lands between, souls are essentially recycled in the Erdtree, as souls enter the tree and are placed into new bodies. This is similar to the Nagan Mabul tree, which is said to exist above a massive chasm in which reincarnating souls are housed. The Sera religion involves many sacred trees, unlike the single massive Erdtree in Elden Ring. Yet there are arguably still several connections between these concepts, as the Erdtree is also related to the concept of immortality, reincarnation, and granting blessings to its adherents. Moreover, the lands between have minor Erdtrees sprouting up all over the place, which is somewhat reminiscent of the Psalm tree producing a great deal of plant life across the realm, though this connection may fit better in another culture's interpretation of the Tree of Life mythos. While baobab trees are also quite sacred in the Sera religion, unlike the previous trees, they are not necessarily considered primordial, and are quite numerous in comparison to the Sas or Nakal, though these trees are also associated with power and life, continuing the pattern of human reverence for trees, especially for hardy, awe-inspiring ones. Just look at these trees. Of course I probably would have found these to be sacred if I were among the Sera people. Native Americans are by no means a single entity in regard to culture, religion, or even values. So I'd like to present an interpretation of the importance of the concept of a sacred tree in Native American cultures, a tradition that has been continued to be carried out by the Naraya Cultural Preservation Center. Is called Dance for All People, which is a tradition of choosing a tree that you find significant and sacred, and engaging in a dancing ritual around the tree. As a quick note, Naraya is an indigenous term that roughly translates to moon, and in this instance is being used as representing a large collection of Native American peoples and beliefs. Like many other cultures and characters in Elden Ring, viewing trees as sacred and deserving reverence is a common pattern among humans in almost any time or medium. Now I would like to read some excerpts from the Dance for All People website, which quite effectively describes the concept of a sacred tree in their own culture, as well as cultures around the world. The ceremonial element for today's reflection is the Tree of Life, aka the Tree of Peace, the Wood of the Cross. The sacred tree can be found in every tradition, in every culture since the dawn of time. From the book The Sacred Tree. The Creator has planted a sacred tree under which they may gather, and there find healing power, wisdom, and security. The roots of this tree spread deep into the body of Mother Earth. Its branches reach upward like hands praying to Father Sky. The fruits of this tree are the good things the Creator has given to the people, teachings that show the path to love, compassion, generosity, patience, wisdom, justice, courage, respect, humility, and many other wonderful gifts. The energy of spirit circulates from and around the branches and roots. Through the tree, spirit permeates the circle, moving in seen and unseen ways. The tree receives our prayers and transmutes them into other dimensions. Just as it transforms carbon monoxide into life-giving oxygen, so does it empower and move our prayers. The tree is in the middle of the circle, because it is like the hub of a wheel, the energetic focal point where the energy of the dance can move and circulate most efficiently. The objects we place on the tree are not so much decorations, as they are an offering of ourselves to spirit that can come back to us energized at the end of the dance, a physical remembrance of our good work. And like the evergreen tree with roots that go deep, we must be constant, eternal, and filled with hope at all times, during all seasons, under all conditions, in unity with our relations. The lessons we can learn from the tree are many. It reminds us to stand tall and push ourselves in both directions, upward and downward, so that our growth is sufficiently grounded that we don't topple and fall. We are like the tree, midway between Mother Earth and the sky. At the Dance for All People, we always dance around a living tree. The life of the dance and the prayers of the dancers continue even after the dance closes on Sunday. We need to be mindful of its living nature, that it has a life, and it is not merely a ceremonial object. Much like that of other cultures, and how the Erdtree is represented in Elden Ring, there's a strong belief and acknowledgement of the reciprocal nature between humans and trees, as trees are an excellent representation of the concept of life and rebirth. While there is so much more, and I truly do mean so much more, that I could cover and relate to Elden Ring, I think this video will be long enough as is. Moreover, I would love to make more focused videos in the future covering specific topics and aspects of how Elden Ring relates to other subjects, such as going more in depth on the similarities between runes and Norse mythology and Elden Ring itself. Though, for now, I believe I have presented many of the possible sources of inspiration for the Erdtree in particular, whether they be conscious or unconscious. Creative works are often clever remixes of existing concepts and ideas, and I think Elden Ring is an excellent example of this. As previously mentioned, From Software is no stranger to drawing inspiration from external sources, and it stands to reason that some of their ideas for Elden Ring were subconsciously inspired by concepts they were already aware of. Furthermore, as the Tree of Life is such a consistent and recurring motif among the majority of world religions and cultures, it also stands to reason that there is a great deal of overlap in information sharing that occurred between some cultures, which may also be why some of these connections exist in the first place, as it's likely that these ideas and beliefs would be transferred across regions of the world as humanity continued to advance and develop. Regardless of how much of Elden Ring, in terms of the story and the lore and the world and all these little tiny details that may not always be readily apparent, regardless of how much of that was unconscious or subconscious versus a conscious, effortful choice, I don't really think it matters, because the difference between Elden Ring and a lot of other From Software's games is that it draws upon humanity's ancient and primal fascination, and our apparent connection, perhaps, to trees. Anyway, thanks for watching, and if you'd like to see more videos like this one, consider subscribing to the channel and dropping a like. Otherwise, have a beautiful day and drink some water.
Preview.